Welcome to
That's High Praise,
a Nicolas Cage podcast. I am your co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
Did we ever settle this matter, Josh?
So I guess we're first off, we should kind of explain this if you guys are new to the show. That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast, is a subsidiary of Victims and Villains nonprofit. And on the Instagram for Victims and Villains, when we released our last episode, which was on The Rock.
The Rock, yeah, with Sean Connery. Yeah.
I talked about, I posted in our stories for people to give you a nickname to go for. And I got a couple feedbacks.
Did you?
You threw in yours, which was VH...
Zest.
Zest.
Yes, VH Zest.
Which you can go with. Corey O'Carroll, who was the guy that did the Victims and Villains theme song between episodes 150 to 250. Saint of Pine Hills, go check him out. It makes great music. Said the Mullet Stash.
Wow, so my Instagram handle.
Or Mr. Mullet Stash.
So many syllables.
I don't know. I think you should just go with Mr. Mullet, but you know,
wow,
that's just me.
That's you. I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where like I didn't trademark the mullet, and I don't think I'm about to either. I mean, I love having a mullet, but still.
Super mullet.
Super mullet. Oh, 90s Superman. Oh,
Sergeant Mullet.
Sergeant? I don't know. Why does it always come back to the mullet with you people?
Wait, what do you mean, you people?
Everyone. That's who I mean.
Oh, okay. So you guys can continue to write into Victims and Villains on Instagram and let us know what you guys think Micah's podcasting.
I want snail mail. Can we get snail mail? Do you have a P.O. box?
We do, yeah.
Sweet. Say it right here.
Yeah, so if you guys want to, you guys can... I don't have a P.O. box. So.
I thought you said you did.
Look. We have an official street address. If you guys want it, write in and I'll give it to you guys.
There we go.
We'll do it via snail mail. But yeah, we're talking. This is an interesting film that we're talking about.
It is.
Because it's a sequel / prequel / not canonical film to 1993's Deadfall, which we covered earlier this year in the Cage Corner podcast, back when that was the precursor to this podcast you're currently listening to. Yeah, so I guess you want to talk about the subtle differences before. I guess let's we're talking about Arsenal, which is the 2017 movie. Basically, it tells the story of two brothers that kind of get conned into a kidnapping scheme.
Yeah, sure. That's what happens.
General thought, because so I want to talk about the original film in 1993 was written and directed by Cage's older brother, Christopher Coppola.
Cool.
Which I didn't know until tonight. And fun fact, there's a scene in the movie where Eddie King...
In Arsenal or
in Arsenal.
Okay.
Eddie King's brother, Buddy, is Christopher Coppola.
Very cool.
So his brother makes a cameo as his older brother.
Wow, talk about like canonical just nods here. That's very cool.
Yeah, that's the only fun fact and trivia I have for this one.
Okay. Very cool.
So I've seen Deadfall.
Yeah,
I covered it. You have not seen Deadfall.
I have not. I've seen clips. Yeah.
I really want to show you Deadfall. It's a blast.
Sure.
It is one of just those movies that's like really terrible, but it's so terrible that it's good. It's just a blast.
Right.
You know, Nicolas Cage at his like craziest.
Yeah.
So the thing about this, and I'm just gonna spoil the ending for Eddie King's journey in Deadfall. And spoiler alert for any listeners right now. Eddie King dies in the in Deadfall. He takes a deep fryer to the face. Face just falls off.
Wow.
And
okay.
Arsenal just completely ignores that. So this kind of feels like it's kind of like...
It's sort of an Earth 2.
It's kind of like an Earth 2, but
Yeah.
they kind of like... The way that they set it up for like that prologue in the beginning, it's like, all right, this is like Eddie King in the world of... Eddie Money, the wrestler, isn't he?
No. Eddie Guerrero.
Okay, maybe I don't know. So Eddie King is like in the prologue, like that kind of feels like it takes place within the canonical version of like Deadfall's storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of where he is before the events of Deadfall. That's at least the way that I took it.
Sure.
But once you kind of get into Eddie and JP and Mikey, who are the brothers in this movie, once you kind of get into them as adults, because it's like 23 years later.
23, yep.
The canon just goes out the window.
Yeah.
So slight subtle differences between Eddie King in Deadfall versus Eddie King in Arsenal is that in Deadfall, he was a actual con man. He was a grifter. Whereas in this one, he just kind of seems like a kingpin.
Yeah, they note that he is basically the closest thing that area of Louisiana has to a mob boss.
Yeah, and that I feel like was kind of I don't know how you feel like having not seen Deadfall, but to me that was kind of one of the biggest disappointments is this film feels so much just like a paint by numbers thriller / heist movie.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have anything to have it stand out. Now, don't get me wrong. There are definite standout moments that I was like, man, this is awesome.
Sure.
But for the most part, like, even Eddie King kind of feels like he fits into that generic copycat nature that this movie does.
Yeah. He fills a role that is needed for the just sort of, like you said, paint by number script of this kind of movie. Yeah.
Because, so I wrote it down in my notes that, like, Eddie King in Deadfall felt like, and I'm going to compare Deadfall a lot to this movie because it's...
Are you? Because I was going to say, like, I'm not sure, like...
It's supposed to be a sequel, so it's technically supposed to be, canonically speaking, the same character.
Wild, but he dies in the original.
It doesn't make any sense to me. So this one, in the original Deadfall, he has like just this unpredictable natures about him. And I showed you some clips from Deadfall tonight before we started recording, just to kind of give you like a general idea of how his character was in Deadfall.
Yeah.
And, you had mentioned too, he's like, he didn't even have cars. The cars were like his big thing in Deadfall.
Yeah.
But he was just really unpredictable. You never knew what you were going to get. He was such a loose cannon.
Yeah.
And here, I felt like you had moments of that. Like, there's even a moment where Mikey... I guess we're getting into spoilers, too. Mikey...
It's a short movie. It's not hard to.
So Mikey gets kidnapped, and he gets ransomed by Eddie King for $350,000 for JP to pay up. And Mikey says, even if he pays, he's still going to kill me. And that unpredictable nature is what makes Eddie King such a compelling character in that sense. And I feel like by adding that additional like dialogue or like exposition that they kind of were hinting that they were going to build to that, but it never rose.
Yeah. And like, he is I think you get that from the beginning, that he is a very unpredictable character, because so like the first scene, which is even then kind of a spoiler, it's before the 23 years later mark when JP and Mikey are still kids, is he's like beating up on this guy, just torturing this guy. No context whatsoever. Eddie King is just going at him. And Mikey, the older brother, sees him, and he's like, tries to run away, and Eddie stops him. He's like, what did you see? And he's like, I saw nothing. And like basically from that point on, Eddie becomes this like employer / what he thinks is like a kind of a surrogate father. And so it's really weird. You immediately get this, like, he goes from one side of the coin to the other of just like being this horrible mob boss, torturous guy, to like taking care of this kid for no reason. Well, for blackmail's sake, I guess. I suppose.
Let's talk about that opening, because that is a wild way to get introduced to this character.
Yeah,
he basically like watches two other guys beat this guy to a chair, and then
you're talking about Mikey. Mikey watches.
No. I'm talking about Eddie. Like Eddie's like in the background.
That's right.
Of that
right.
scene.
Yeah.
And then when Eddie kind of comes to the forefront, he takes this pipe and he sticks it down the guy's throat, and he's like blowing a cigarette, and he inhales into it, and then takes the baseball bat to the pipe.
Yeah.
So it's like essentially driving it through the and I mean that's such a wild way to be introduced to a character.
Yeah.
It definitely feels in line with Eddie King.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. The idea of Eddie King kind of assuming that he's like this, he's Mikey's surrogate father. Like, I want to understand better their dynamic.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing that I felt like this film was missing, was that compelling narrative in nature. It's
right.
Like, I want to understand how Mikey and how JP, how they got involved into the business of Eddie King. Like, if Eddie King's really as bad as everyone in New Orleans is saying, how?
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
Yeah. And it gets odd. It gets kind of confusing. So, like, in the first part of the movie, like, basically it's implied that, like, after Eddie gives Mikey work, Mikey passes on his lawn mowing job to his little brother JP, and they allude later on that like that was everything. That's kind of how like JP builds his career. Is he just like is just a blue collar guy mowing lawns, and then goes straight up the ranks through to like I guess construction. It would make more sense to me if it was like landscaping, but
that's what I thought
it ends
too.
up being construction. weird, and then when you first get introduced to older King, when Mikey goes to see him as an adult, King is like, "Don't you owe me money?" Yeah, you owe me money. And that's so confusing, because why would you owe your employer?
Yeah, there's a lot about this movie that doesn't make sense.
It's so strange.
Yeah, there's a lot about this movie that doesn't make sense, and that's kind of one of them too. Is also like they are so incredibly vague with the relationship between like JP, Mikey, and Eddie. Like I feel like there are these like more like tender scenes. Like there's a scene between like after like Mikey's already like kidnapped, and he's talking to one of like the goons or the henchmen for Eddie, and he's like, "Look, man, we've known each other for 16 years." Like, and they try to have this like establish this like moment between the characters.
Yeah, real strange,
real weird. But that moment is like, I understand their relationship so much better than I do Eddie's relationship, and I felt like the narrative establishes these smaller relationships a lot more effectively than it does the compelling relationships.
Yeah. Yes. Super weirdly good point. Like, they spend just an odd amount of time on, what was her name? Alexa, the niece?
Alexis, the niece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, you see her, so it's Mikey's daughter. And you see her like going out with this boy, and like they're doing drugs, and then she gets kidnapped. I don't know. It's just weird. Like, it kind of makes sense to build to the kidnapping, but it's also like, yeah, very much like, why are you spending all these intimate details with this girl and her uncle? Because at one point he like rescues her from like getting smacked by this douche, and like, it's so strange.
Also, it's a weird thing too that once JP gets the call, he's like, "Hey, your brother's been kidnapped," and he's like trying to like call around like all of like Mikey's like normal hangout spots. So he calls his ex-wife, and she just casually is like, "No, Alexis is hanging out with a bunch of meth heads."
Yeah, yeah. Like, it's just like, okay, this girl is how old? They never tell, but she lives with her folks.
Yeah.
And her mom is just like, yeah, just hanging out with meth heads. Like, it's nothing.
Like, there's like no level of concern from either like the mother or JP.
Yeah.
I'm just like, the movie does a really good job at showcasing like how much of like a deadbeat Mikey is, but clearly there's some like bad, weird stuff that's like happening between like the mother, because the mother's never working. She's like always like home in a robe, like either like drinking or like doing pills.
Yeah.
And like it's just a weird like family dynamic that it's like, oh, we're just gonna paint him like the bad guy, and everyone else is gonna everyone around him is gonna look like the hero.
Yeah. So what it feels like is it's like what it feels like they are divorced,
or separated,
but it's not actually like painted that way at all. But that's the way that it feels. They argue like they're divorced or separated, but everything is shot like they live together.
Yeah.
Real weird.
It's super weird.
Yeah.
But you're right. And I never caught on to that until you just said that, because they still live in the house that they grew up in.
Yep.
And I never caught on to that, though. I also, too, we were talking about this like by the end of the film. This movie feels oddly out of time, too. I feel like it was, from a visual standpoint, kind of like felt weird to watch, because you'd mentioned that it felt like there's a blue light filter throughout the entire thing. And for me, like the cinematography, it feels almost identical to Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Like, yeah, it's real shaky, real like...
It's like
up close, kind of.
Yeah, like the greens and like the yellows are just like very like up front.
Yes.
And then they have like these like moments where, like, visually speaking, where like it'll just feel modern. Like it's very weird how like the visual cinematography kind of goes back to this like nostalgic feel, but then at the same time it still feels modern.
Yeah.
It feels like, just like I said, like out of time.
So I kind of wonder if like if maybe they were trying to make it like as though this movie was a period piece without actually pushing it back in time at all.
That's so weird, because there's a line that JP says towards the end where he's like gathering up the money, and we later find out that it was the stunt grenade, which is one of the best scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah,
the way that they like wove that.
We actually haven't talked about. There's a predominant character, and then there's a really early event that we haven't talked about. So before Eddie King, you kind of notice. So this was like the beginning of the movie when they were kids. So JP and Mikey, like JP for whatever reason, is just trashed on by his older brother, Mikey. But then, like, when no one's looking, Mikey's really nice to him. It's really strange. Yeah, so... But then, so Mikey comes home one day, gets home before his brother by a couple minutes, and finds, I think it was their dad?
No, they later said that it was their uncle.
Oh, it was their uncle, that's right. So there's no parents in the equation. And their uncle had, like, shot himself. And so he like gives his younger brother a bunch of quarters and yells at him to go to the arcade and like go play video games. Really weird. And it's one of those moments in the movie where it's like, this should be pivotal. This should be sort of like defining why they live their lives the way that they do, or at least why Mikey does, because Mikey never really, it's implied that he like never goes to college. He's always in trouble. He's always like real not great with money, things like that. And it's just like there and then it's not.
Well, they try to weave it back in, because like it's supposed to be like this like significant day where everything changes, and this is the day that you know he is given all this money to go blow it on the arcade, just truly be a kid, not have to worry about anything else.
Yeah.
And then something comes along where it's like he says to Sal at the end of the movie, like, He's like, yeah, he's like, he gave me this signal about meeting me at the arcade, and then he shares that story again. And then it never, like, comes up again.
Yeah, and that was it.
Yeah, it's a really weird moment. You think that you do think it would be pivotal, but it's just kind of like a throwaway line.
Yeah.
This film's use of callbacks is, like, really weird.
It's inconsistent.
Super inconsistent. Yeah. Because at first it's the lawnmower job that's kind of like placed him on this path, but then you get this like rewind moment where he's talking to John Cusack's character and he's like,
well, it's just the character we haven't brought up yet.
It's the arcade. The arcade is the game changing day for our relationship. But yeah, John Cusack's character is a really interesting character to talk about.
Wild. Yeah. So. Again, a part where this movie just doesn't provide context. And I don't even remember if it's... I want to say it's actually before Mikey gets kidnapped. You just see John Cusack pull up in a car with sunglasses on and like a bandana or some crap. And JP goes out and talks to him. And like it's real hush-hush and weird. And then you don't find out till like, I don't know, the next act of the movie that he's a cop, I guess. So
I'm gonna respond. I'm gonna unwind all this, unpack everything you just said.
Please do.
So, John Cusack's character in this, from a visual standpoint, looks like he went to a party city in 1993, wanted to be both Rambo and Eddie King, and they only had the Rambo headband, the Eddie King glasses, and he's like, well, they're both black, so obviously at this point I can just dress in goth because, gothic fashion's starting to raise. And then he just never kind of moved out of that. It's really weird, and it's really jarring to see him without sunglasses on in this movie.
Yeah, because then you realize it's John Cusack. Otherwise, he's this like tough guy undercover cop. For whatever reason, JP just knows.
Yeah, it's never explained.
It's never discussed. It's never, don't know why he's undercover. Nothing.
I want a spin-off movie from this movie where
just with that guy.
It's just Sal.
Yeah.
Sal and his like taxi driver like friend.
Yeah.
The guy that had like the mohawk. And
he'd been undercover for like a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. For no reason. Again, not stated.
Yeah, it's like this movie doesn't like want to provide like context
for anything.
It provides like context for people, for like some of the main characters, but some, not all. And even the main character of Eddie King is not consistent because it's a completely different character from the one we met in Deadfall.
Right, like he talks similarly, dresses similarly, and
that's it.
Even
he parts his hair differently.
Yeah,
because in Deadfall, like it's just like a straight like to the side.
Well, I think in Deadfall it was Nick Cage's hair.
This one is a bad wig.
This one is a wig. That's got to be the difference.
And a prosthetic nose.
Oh, which is glorious.
The prosthetic nose doesn't call me back to Deadfall. It calls me back to.
He looks like Richard Nixon with
Never
a wig
on Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just a really thick, beautiful mustache.
Yeah. It's so wild. It's weird, too. Something I thought about kind of on the more of the positive end is like, it's really cool to see Nick Cage play an antagonist. I don't know that I've ever seen him play a bad guy before this film.
That's true.
And that was really cool.
It is rare that you get to see him play an antagonist.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I feel like you get to see him play like shady characters, but never to the extent of Eddie Money, and that's one of the reasons I'm sorry, Eddie King.
Eddie King, yeah.
I really love Eddie King as a character.
No, he's a cool character.
He's such a compelling character.
Yes,
and I feel like they really watered him down for this film, which is so wild to me because this movie comes out right in like the height, right in the prime of like Nicolas Cage, like straight to videos, like insanity. Like this is 1 year before Mandy.
Yeah.
Like come on. Like you had every shot to bring back the character that Coppola created and you just blew it.
Yeah.
But let's get into some of the more positives because I feel like we have just
Yeah, we've got to trash this movie.
pooped on this movie.
And
so
honestly,
much.
there are still things I haven't said that were weird.
You want to lightning round them real quick?
Yeah, so the one thing that I thought of toward the end is like, there's two things. So JP, the little brother, goes to his like secretary guy.
No. They established that that's his partner.
Okay, you never see him outside of the computer. Anyway, but okay, he goes to his partner. Partner's always behind the computer, and he's like, "Hey, this is the situation. My brother, blah 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 blah. I need 350 G's. Just start liquidating everything." And they make a cool note that like he is worth 350 G's, and there is no reason that like that this anonymous caller who ends up being King should know that, and that's kind of cool.
Wait, did you not know that it was Eddie King the first time?
No, I knew.
Oh, okay.
I knew, but still,
Just
context.
tracking. We're making sure we're on the same page.
Yeah. Just context. The little bit of context that they did actually provide. So anyway, he like roughs up his partner, and his partner comes to him the next day and just throws him a bag and just like, "There it is. It's all there. I got it." Boom. That's it. No explanation. No business down the toilet. Nothing. All the money he needs. No reason at all.
The first time that that scene happened, I couldn't help but think of the that Family Guy scene where Peter's in like financial trouble and he's like asking the guys at the Drunken Clam like what he should do to make money. He's like, well, you can hook yourself off to fat chicks for $1,000, and like that's like everyone's like solution is that he just turns to prostitution.
Yeah.
And so like given that this film doesn't like have context, and like I as a viewer have to like infer how his partner got all this money, I'm just turning to prostitution.
just one night, 350 G's. That's it. Yeah, so there's that. That was the one really big kerfuffle. And then toward the end, right, like when JP is going to get his brother out, right, and they're fighting their way out and stuff after like the money case blew. So he's just like grabbing guns. He's like he cocked a shotgun one-handed with his non-dominant hand, and it's just like, this kid was in landscaping for 23 years. What the heck is he doing with this shotgun? Dodging bullets and crap with these mobsters. It makes no sense at all.
Movie logic, just out the window. To your point, I mean, I feel like there's not really a whole lot of logic. Like you really have to suspend your disbelief.
Suspension of disbelief. Yeah,
for this movie. But that leads into probably one of my highlights from this movie.
Okay.
And you pointed this out, is the Zack Snyder isms that this movie possesses.
Yes.
And this is actually, I feel like, what makes Nicolas Cage's intro into this movie so freaking memorable is it's like they're playing like an old gospel song.
Yeah.
But it's just like super slow-mo, and he is just beating the crap out of this guy, and blood is splatter is just everywhere.
Oh, sweet and sour sauce. Continue.
It does look like sweet and sour sauce, but given this film's budget, I would not be surprised that it was sweet and sour sauce. And then they bring it back later with his brother Buddy.
Yep.
I really liked the way that they set up those particular shots. They are just some of the most just stunning shots in this entire film.
They're gorgeous, and they make really good use of the color palette that
Yeah.
the movie just maintains.
Yeah.
The very like Ocean's 13 color palette.
It feels so out of context, like
Yeah.
to bring it context back. It feels so out of context from like the rest of the film, because it's like this is like prestigious shots.
Yeah.
That they're setting up
gorgeous
for these like grotesque acts, and then like the rest of the movie just looks like it was like found in like a Blockbuster, and then like 15 years after they closed.
Yeah. Weird. It's weird. Like the production isn't bad, but the storyboarding's not great.
No.
Yeah, and like there are some really cool detail. Like I really loved some of the dialogue. Like you don't get a lot of like true heart to heart like brother dialogue like in this movie. There's this really cool story that JP tells that when he was a little kid, that he saw a street preacher, and he was like, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that the guy was homeless or rambling. I just knew that he was talking, and he was like, he loves you. He loves you, man. Like, he would die for you. He would do anything for you. He loves you. And he was like, I went up to him after everyone else around us had left. I was 5 years old, and he's like, hey, how do you know my brother? And there were just like really cool, like really touching, genuine moments of dialogue like that in this film.
So the relationship between Mikey and JP brings up an interesting question that I was pondering throughout the remainder of this movie. And when we view family, do you feel like you have this is going to be kind of personal for the next few minutes.
Okay, yeah.
Do you feel like you have a blind spot for like family, or are you able to be like objective and like have like legitimate heart-to-heart conversations
with my own personal family?
Yeah.
Like not my wife, like my extended family.
Yeah.
Not everyone. My sister, yes. My mom, yeah. My brother's not as much, but more and more so throughout the years. We just kind of seem to like, saying I love you isn't weird anymore. Things like that.
Sure.
I was the youngest of 5, and I was the youngest by quite a bit. So like I was kind of in a runt position. So I got picked on and stuff like any younger brother, and but as we've all gotten older, like there have been many, many more times that my brothers have said things that have just been like awesome, but very surprising to hear from my brothers, and it's been really cool and made me feel a lot more comfortable. So I don't know, like. And my dad, same kind of deal with my dad as with my brothers, where like sometimes my dad just says things and I'm just like, man, this is awesome, because my dad growing up was just not, I don't remember him as being this vulnerable, and so I find myself a lot more easy to like open up and have, just be honest or vulnerable about things. So I don't know, why do you ask that?
Like, this is a bad situation. Like, you just need to kind of like remove yourself from it. Like, there's a point where his like wife on the 4th of July was like, hey, why don't you just like remove yourself and like let's just focus on like our family.
Right.
And it's always kind of been a thing that I've also asked myself, like, do I have blind spots when it comes to like my parents?
Yeah. So
or,
what
like,
you're saying
sister?
is like, do you have? Maybe I misunderstood your question. Do you or do I have blind spots, as in like I'm not willing to accept the fact that like my family may have like real issues that I can't look past, and I just like accept them because they're my family and that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you made this really cool point. When we were watching the movie, so there's a scene where JP and his brother Mikey were talking about how Mikey had basically just blown a bunch of money that JP had loaned him that he needed, and Mikey is in the next scene. He's in a bar drinking, and Josh, you brought up this point where like, why is it that in movies when people are depicted as being broke, like penniless, you always see them in public bars spending probably decent amount of money on drinks, because drinks at bars aren't cheap. And immediately what I thought of was my brother, because my brother would be, he would need money, be in a position where he needed money or whatever, and he didn't really have it, but what he had, he would not spend on good things.
Yeah, I do. And I feel like sometimes, like, I brought this up because, like, I've had to go through kind of being married has helped me kind of, like, filter through some of those, like, blind spots that I've had, and
Sure.
kind of, like, having third parties that are able to see the same thing that I am through different lights have helped me to kind of come through it. And I mean, it's been a long time, but like a lot of like prayer and to kind of like get to this point, and like a lot of fighting. But my mom and I and even my dad like are at a point now where it's like we're able to kind of be a little bit more open and not kind of have these like close-minded responses that often yield like arguments and stuff along those lines. And so it's always kind of been interested in me of, you know, how people handle family. Because I think that, you know, I love the way that The Simpsons put it.
Sure.
You know, Homer basically, if you guys listen to the top 10 Simpsons episodes Victims put out a couple weeks ago, one of the things that I talked about, one of my favorite episodes is Behind the Laughter. And there's a line in that episode where Bart's kind of talking about how Homer was mad at like all the TV shows that were coming out in the 80s that were like picture perfect and they didn't look like the chaos of The Simpsons. And so that's kind of where the idea of The Simpsons came from. But it's true. Like I feel like media kind of doesn't portray the chaos that family can yield. And I'm glad that we're kind of in this like spot right now where you do have movies like Arsenal that kind of are able to show the raw honesty that come with family. Like family is messy territory, and this film just does not hold back anything when it comes to portraying that.
Yeah, it's very cool that you brought that up, especially like talking about just modern depictions of that, because like there were definitely points in the movie where I caught myself like really thinking about Hereditary. You know, just because like I thought about, you know, sort of the beginning of the movie, and you had their uncle and he killed himself, and that sort of introduces trauma, and like the older brother Mikey witnesses trauma, and then I think that like a lot of times kind of what happens is like when you've had like bad seeds sown into your life, even if it was just things you were exposed to, sometimes like the life that you end up having is just not great. You know, if you have like a family that has a history of, you know, and that's something that's pretty talked about when it comes to like you know, when it comes to addiction and things, is like if you have alcoholism in your family, right, you probably shouldn't touch alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, because there really are things that just kind of get
passed down generation to generation.
Yeah, and it's wild. But then you see JP, and what JP has, it's not that he doesn't have the same family, but what he has is an older brother who kind of took himself for granted to be able to give his brother a future.
Yeah.
You know, and so you have like, you see kind of a good seeds in his life because his influence was really positive.
That is one thing that I will say I really admired about the best for his brother. Like, doesn't necessarily care about himself.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
But, you know, and eventually that well of love is going to run out. And he kind of reaches, there's a point. There's I don't know if you called this or not, there's a throwaway scene. It's completely just random where Mikey is actually in his living room and just holds a gun to his head and is kind of considering killing himself.
Yeah.
I was ready for it to kind of be like, you know, he witnessed his uncle with the shotgun, like he was the one who found the body, like you said, like he's got this trauma embedded into his DNA and from that day forward.
Sure.
And he's not really doing anything with it. And then there's another scene where JP and Mikey are talking about, you know, just what, you know, a terrible father that he is, like how much of like a deadbeat he is, how he's broke, you know, how he was kicked out of the Marines, and like just this cycle of just, you know, constantly falling short.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get to see insights into, you know, Mikey also wanting to possibly also kill himself.
Yeah.
And I think some of that comes from some of the things that he's experienced through the empire of Eddie King. Mm. And then you have some of that stuff that is just unresolved trauma from his time at, you know, walking in on his uncle and kind of the things that he experienced. Because within a week, like, I mean, he saw a guy being beaten to death and finding a dead body. I mean, that stuff kind of really messes you up and kind of doesn't bode well for your mental health moving into adulthood.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I feel like on that note, though, this one is going to be a lot shorter of an episode than you guys are probably used to.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from the fact that this is just a really straightforward paint-by-numbers thriller, and somehow also dabbles in mystery noir.
Yeah, little occasionally.
It's not consistent. It's just like boop, boop, boop.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting. The movie kind of has an indie movie vibe to it, straight to video kind of a deal, or straight to DVD, if you are that way. It's I thought it was going to be kind of a slow burn, and it sort of feels like that sometimes, but really it's a short burn. It's really like, I think content wise, without like beginning and end credits, it's like an 80-minute movie. It's not long.
Yeah. So all right. So before we give our ratings, we just want to just throw this out there while we're still, the subject of suicide and depression is still prevalent and still fresh in the earbuds of you listening right now. I just want to encourage you that you have value and that you have worth, and that if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording right now, there are 130 suicides that take place on American soil every day. And when you look to international numbers, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can reach out to the nonprofit Victims and Villains for resources. Go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. You guys can find resources including the Suicide Lifeline. It's 1-800-273-8255, or you can text HELP to 741-741, or go to victimsandvillains.net/hope again for resources, all of which you guys can currently find in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening or streaming this episode right now. So please stay with us, because this is the real reason why we make the content we do. But speaking of contents, is Arsenal worthy of high praise? Yes or no?
I gotta say no. I really do.
This is the first film we've done together where this is a solid no for me too.
Yeah.
This movie has like great scenes.
Yeah.
But it's such like they are far and few between. Like this movie, it does not take context well, and I think we've spent a lot of time talking about why this movie is not worthy of high praise. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So the Patreon. You want to talk about the Patreon?
Yeah. So if you guys would like to suggest episode movies Nicolas Cage for us to cover on this, and would also like a exclusive bonus episode and get to hear Victims and Villains episodes before anyone else, and on top of all of that, you say you can also help us get mental health resources into conventions and film festivals and schools, all for as little as $1 a month. Starting at $1, you guys can help us to save 2 lives every month by handing out resources. And at the $5 tier, you guys can help us keep producing the content that you're listening to right now. That is patreon.com/victims and villains. But speaking of social media, where can people find you online, sir?
Oh, you can mostly find me on Instagram at Damian Wayne.
You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. Make sure that you guys are writing in. Let us know what you guys want.
Yeah,
Micah's
let's get that snail mail.
podcasting alter ego to go. Yeah, just let us know what his alter ego in the world of podcasting should be. But you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find episodes from the flagship show Victims and Villains, as well as this episodes of this episode, the previous incarnation of this show, the Cage Corner podcast, and much more, along with movie reviews, and most importantly, suicide prevention resource library that we are constantly stocking. So I don't know what we're talking about next, but we'll be back in a couple weeks to talk about more Cage. Keep on caging.
Yeah, makes sense. This movie's based in Louisiana.